be on a war footing with... Sorry. Do nations need to be on a war footing, this is on Rose, national service, mass mobilisation, rationing of fossil fuels, etc.?
Just looking at a copy of my book there, Jerry. I can't remember which chapter it is, but in Hope in Hell, I have got a whole section on whether we should be going onto a war footing to deal with the climate crisis, with the emergency. And there are a lot of people who think that is the right button to press when it comes to persuading people to be responding in the way that I've just been mapping out. But unless we begin to talk with that level of urgency, as in we're really right up against it now, this is the last chance. If we don't do what we need to do in the next 10 years, it might well be too late after that. So clearly we have to go onto a completely different footing from the one we're on at the moment. And they have lots of really powerful analogies which they can draw on. The favourite one of all is what happened in the Second World War, when after a lot of dithering, the Japanese brought America into the war by its attack on Pearl Harbor, as you will remember. Up until that point, the contribution of the USA to the Allied war effort was pretty much zilch, frankly. A little bit of support, but really nothing. Pearl Harbor changed everything. And within 6 months, the totality of America's industrial base, which was already in 1942 a very powerful emerging industrial machine, the totality of that machine was converted to produce weapons of war. There wasn't a single private motor car constructed in the United States again until 1946. Everything went into producing bombs, tanks, ships, you name it, the whole bit. Now, this is an analogy that slightly worries me, because obviously summoning up the power of militarism as a way of responding to the climate crisis is a bit of a mixed blessing. And frankly, when you look at the trillions of dollars that are wasted every year through investment in weapons of war, trillions and trillions of dollars every year, a little bit of me says, please don't give me a militaristic analogy. I want something a bit different from that, because who are we going to go to war against? We're going to go to war against ourselves? Doesn't seem to make much sense. Some people say we should have a war against carbon. They're not scientists, those people. They don't really sort of get the fact that carbon is a pretty essential building block of life on Earth, and going to war on carbon is not clever. Are we going to go to war on the fossil fuel companies? Well, yes, personally. I'd love to see a lot more being brought to bear in a completely non-violent, pacifist way. And I'd like to see the people I was referring to tonight, the board of directors of ExxonMobil in 1978, and all boards of directors on all of those companies since then, right through until 2008, when some of this information, the final details of the information was surfaced. I'd like to see every single one of them prosecuted as a criminal, personally, for their combined dereliction of duty. Sure, I'd like to do that. So moving on to that kind of footing might help a bit, but that isn't what we really need to do. We ought to be able to ramp up the urgency without necessarily going on to a war footing, I hope. But it gives a sense, it does give a bit of a sense of what the nearest equivalent might be. What is a non-war footing that is the equivalent of going on to war footing? That's the story. That's a very deep sigh. I'm with you. I get it. That was your side, was it, sir?
I don't know.
You don't know. Well.
Right. You're past president of Population Matters. And
I'm not past
population
president.
growth.
I'm still president.
Yeah. Population growth is one of the most important climate change.
I'll repeat.
Sir David Attenborough said, "Be sensible, have no more than 2 children." the government should, on the 1st of April next year, bring in the budget, a lady can, after she's had 2 children, can have no more child benefit.
Okay, right.
Now, the other
No, got it. Can I just repeat that, because otherwise I won't be able to repeat it. So the question, or comment so far, but I think there is a question in there somewhere, to me as president of an organisation called Population Matters, is why are we not getting on top of this issue about continuing population growth on a finite planet at a time when really the existing pressure from population and increased growth in the economies of the countries that are still growing fast, why are we not doing more about this? Well, I've been an advocate for addressing the population challenge, overpopulation challenge, since 1974, when I first joined the Ecology Party. It still really matters to me. But you can see why people get a bit nervous, and that's because of the second half of your question, or comment, which was that the only way to deal with this is to start dictating to people, and particularly to women, exactly what each and every woman anywhere on this planet is allowed to do in terms of the number of children that she has. That is totally and utterly unacceptable. And one of the reasons why the population debate is so difficult is because there have been countries that have done that, particularly China and India, where for long periods of time the government of those countries came up with rulings as to how women would manage their own fertility. And if they didn't comply with the laws of the land, then they were punished. And the record in China, as you will all know, was completely horrendous in terms of the imposition on women's rights at that time. So the reason why I'm just being a bit cautious here is I never ever go there, because you don't need to go there. Where you need to go is exactly in the other direction and say, well, what if we just did everything we could to ensure that every single woman was able to manage her own fertility in every country, wherever she lived, including the 227 million women today who are not able to manage their fertility because of the countries they live in, or because of the lack of reproductive healthcare services, or because girls are not allowed to stay in schools. Why don't we bring forward a completely different approach to progressive family planning of the ways that have been done in country after country after country? My God, we know how to make this story work well. So why don't we just ramp up our investment in all of that, unlike our benighted government that has just axed its funding